Newsnight now on BBC Two with Gavin Esler.
Tonight, a truly British network, the Transport Secretary on high-speed rail.
HS2, no thank you!
But not everyone is rejoicing at plans to boost the economy by spending £33 billion on a rail link from London to Birmingham and beyond.
The upset of having one's house taken away from one without any say-so. How could you not care about that?
We'll debate whether the money might be better spent elsewhere as the Transport Minister faces critics of the project. Good evening. From the time of the first Roman roads, major transportation projects have had huge economic, social and even political consequences. And going ahead with so-called HS2, the high-speed rail link from London northwards, the government is committing taxpayer billions to linking the most prosperous part of these islands, the southeast, with the Midlands and eventually the north. Talks with the Scottish government are promised. Critics say the money would be better spent on other things. We'll explore that argument in a moment. First, Joe Lynham on a project called today by some a white elephant and by the government a truly British network.
When the first ever railway lines were being built in the 1820s, the reaction of the people was described as fear and fascination, now the subject of a new exhibition in the National Railway Museum. What was described then as the ruination of the countryside became a permanent part of Britain's landscape. 200 years later, as the government finally endorses the country's biggest ever infrastructure endeavour, there's still plenty of fascination and plenty of fear.
I could have gone for the short-term option, rely on a patch and mend approach, leave our railway networks overstretched, overburdened and less resilient. But let's be clear, the price for that would have been paid in lost business, lower growth, fewer jobs and more miseries for passengers on a network that could not cope with the capacity.
When built, High Speed 2 will depart from a beefed-up Euston station in London and head west and north to an even newer station in Birmingham, taking a mere 45 minutes. All going to plan, it'll be built by 2026. Phase 2 would see trains heading to Manchester and cutting the journey time from the northwest to London to 1 hour and 8 minutes, while another spur will travel to Leeds, where a journey to the capital could be cut to an hour and a half. Phase 2 is penciled in for completion by 2033.
HS2, no thank you!
But what's designed by architects in London has a very real impact elsewhere, especially in the lush green valleys of the Chilterns, home to some of the safest Tory seats in Christendom, but also home to HS2's most vociferous opponents.
Which used to be a pub is now a gym, and that's going to go as well.
Nick Rose is the leader of Chiltern District Council and a member of the anti-HS2 movement 51M.
How much of that was negotiated with locals when the route planning?
Nothing's been negotiated with locals. They just decide what they want to do.
This is Department for Transport now, is it?
This is Department of Transport, yes. They don't negotiate. They just say, this is where the route's going to be. You can then make a protestation and say, well, actually, we don't think that's quite right.
Right.
And sometimes they listen and sometimes they don't.
We understand from the maps, although it's not 100% clear, that it will now be 50 yards in that direction.
Alex Sheffield's 450-year-old home is right on the new line. The house itself will be spared, but much of her garden and farm will be bulldozed, according to the latest plans.
So when people accuse you of being a NIMBY, Alex, what do you say?
That I challenge anyone in my position not to be a NIMBY if they had their house. That was the upset of having one's house taken away from one without any say-so. How could you not care about that?
A few hundred miles further up the line, the people who are set to benefit from Phase 2 of the project are much more enthusiastic.
We initially asked our members about high-speed rail and whether they wanted that to come to the region. Over 90% of our members said yes, they were in favour of it coming to the Leeds City region. That's because it firms up their investment plans, it gives them certainty for the future, which is very much what business wants. It also will mean it can attract new business to the area because of those improved transport connections.
And 40 miles south of Leeds is Sheffield, the Deputy Prime Minister's constituency, though one wonders whether he'll still be in that post by 2033 when HS2 arrives.
It's really great news. It's great news for the whole country, and I think especially for the great cities of the north. It's Leeds, Sheffield, Doncaster, you name it, because for so long governments have only spent all their time worrying about what goes on in the City of London and the South East. And this is a big investment in the future which links north and south together so that everybody, wherever you live, but particularly in the north of the country, will share in prosperity in the future.
There are plenty of people who say that the government's motivation in pressing ahead with HS2 are more political than economic. Certainly connecting the West Midlands, where there are plenty of marginal seats, with London will play well on the doorsteps in 2015. And the Tories could legitimately say that they're not just focused on the South East, but also economically in the north.
If the high-speed rail serves the economies of the West Midlands and the North West and boosts them, then the Conservatives will have made a real impact in the two regions which are amongst the killing grounds at general elections, where governments are made or broken, stuffed full of marginal seats. The Conservatives were 19 seats short at the last election. In the West Midlands and North West alone, there are about 24 seats where they are very, very close to Labour. So if they get a benefit from it, it might help make the difference for them at the next election.
The centre-right think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, normally agrees with Conservative Party politics, but not on this one.
One of the reasons people think that HS2 has gained support within the Conservative Party is because that party did so badly during the general election in areas like the West Midlands and the north of England. So this is seen as a big carrot to woo voters in those regions. But having said that, I think that voters realise that they're going to have to pay for this with their tax money, so they're probably not so easily fooled.
Even though the government may have said full steam ahead, today might also start a number of major legal challenges aimed at delaying or killing the project. In that time, of course, technology may have moved on to such an extent that we may be able to teleport between cities.
Joe Lynham there. I'm joined by the Transport Minister Norman Baker and three opponents of the scheme. Martin Tett, who's chairman of a group of 18 local authorities opposed to the project, Sue Holden, the Chief Executive of the Woodland Trust, and Alistair Heath, the editor of City AM. And Minister, first of all, with all the economic problems that we face, why is now a good time to promise to spend about £33 billion on shaving some minutes off getting from Birmingham to London?
Well, the objective of pursuing this ideal, which is shared by all three parties in Parliament, is not to shave time off the journey between London and Birmingham. It's to create economic prosperity in the north, and it's also to deal with the chronic overcrowding which we're anticipating on our railways. We've already got a situation where the number of people on the railways have doubled in the last 15 years. The West Coast Main Line, which we spent £9 million on, is almost full up already. And unless we create more capacity north-south, we're going to simply have people either priced off the railways or standing for very long distances.
But if it's such a great idea, why not get on with it? Why wait till 2026?
Well, we're getting on with it as fast as we can, and the Transport Secretary today promised she would do what she could to accelerate the timetable. We have a complicated process in Parliament. We must listen to this in terms of inch by inch looking at the line as it goes through proper scrutiny. So the bill will not be out of Parliament until 2015. So we have to deal with this properly, taking account of the views which are expressed to us.
But when you look at all these problems and you talk about overcrowding, I mean, you know that commuter trains are seriously overcrowded. You know that Heathrow is seriously overcrowded or overstretched. All the possibilities you had, this is by far the best one, is it?
No, because that would be a fair question if we were doing nothing else. But the reality is we have got, never mind HS2, we've got, apart from that, the biggest rail investment programme in this country since Victorian times, with Crossrail going ahead in its entirety, Thames Link.
You've chosen this. You've chosen to give priority to this in terms of money and so on, not a new airport in the southeast or the commuter trains or anything else.
We are doing commuter trains. Southern, we authorised another £80 million for Southern over the Christmas period. The reality is we've got a very big rail investment programme taking place now. HS2 has a lead-in period, and when Crossrail is completed, the budget line, which presently pays for Crossrail, can be transferred to HS2.
Let's bring in some of those who are yet to be convinced of this. Martin Tetz, first of all, the changes to the project, for instance, longer tunnels, more tunnels, that kind of thing, does that actually help you? Because it means that the areas that you care about will not be so badly affected as you see it.
Well, I think the key point, Gavin, is it's not about woods and fields, much as that matters to local people. As local authorities, we're very used to the fact we have to take strategic and quite often quite controversial decisions. The problem for the government is when you're spending £32 billion worth of your money, my money, every viewer's money, you've got to ensure that what you're spending it on is good value for money and really in the national interest. The problem they have is that virtually every independent observer who's looked at this thinks this is a very poor business case, it's poor value for money, and the national interest just isn't
But you're
proven.
talking about the national interest, and people at home are going to think you're actually thinking about Buckinghamshire. You're thinking about NIMBYism, you're thinking about your backyard.
Well, of course, that's the sort of slur that people like Andrew Adonis throw at us, who was the original Labour champion for this. And remember, this is Gordon Brown's scheme initially. The argument for this, and the Transport Select Committee looked at it in great detail, and they said, don't throw the acronym NIMBY around. This is actually about justifying a business expenditure of £32 billion at a time of major national austerity.
But he's still not.
Well, the £32 billion starts kicking in about 2017, 2018. It doesn't kick in now. The preparation costs in this Parliament are £750 million. And as I explained, that the cross-hill expenditure, when that ends, the budget line will transfer to HS2. So we're carrying on with investment in the railways now in the way that we've been advocated to do in terms of expenditure. So I don't accept that case. The Transport Select Committee said there was a good case for a high-speed line. And in terms of the business case, this has got to pay back. Every pound you spend has £2 paying back. That's a good investment for transport.
Although those figures have gone down, you accept?
No, I don't accept.
Well,
it's 1.76 to 1 for the first phase and 2.35, I think, for the second phase.
How much extra have you had to spend on things like longer tunnels and so on in the hope of buying off local opposition when you haven't done it? You haven't managed to?
Well, it's not a question of buying off local opposition. It's a question of listening to people's consultation responses and responding properly to those.
How much did that cost?
Well, as a matter of fact, if you take one of the tunnels which was questioned in the Commons today, because we're actually avoiding an aquifer, we're actually saving £250 million by having a tunnel compared to what we did before.
So the net cost of building more tunnels?
There is a net cost, but it's not significant, particularly in terms of the overall scheme.
Well, 33
well,
billion.
The overall
nothing is significant compared to that, but I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions more.
The top line figure has not changed significantly from today's announcement, and it's worth also saying that there's a 60% cushion to allow for overspend in that 33 million.
Martin said it's not about woodlands and so on, however important they are. There's a bigger case, but what is your anxiety about the woodlands?
It is about the woodlands. From the Woodland Trust perspective, it's really important to weigh up the economic case for this with the environmental cost, and we think the environmental damage is too great. So there are going to be 19 ancient woods destroyed by this route, and a further 27 ancient woods will be damaged. Ancient woods are our rainforest. They're an irreplaceable habitat, one of our richest wildlife habitats, and we believe that level of loss is unacceptable. And it can't be replaced.
But aren't some of these woods supposed to be relocated?
It's impossible to relocate something that's been there for hundreds of years. This is a really unique habitat that is it's not been disturbed for about 400 years. You can't just lift it up and move it.
So why are you promising to relocate some of these ancient woodlands? I mean, that does sound like a kind of nonsensical statement, doesn't it?
Well,
if it's ancient, it's ancient.
What we're also doing is planting millions of trees along the line.
But they won't be, by definition, as you know, ancient woodland.
They won't be ancient woodland. But what we're also doing, of course, is listening very carefully to what people have said. There's now 22 miles of tunnel compared to just 14 in the consultation. 56 miles is going to be in deep cutting. Half the line will be unseen. And then the Chilterns AONB, which we accept as a very sensitive area, just 2 miles will be on the surface. So we've taken great step to try and minimise the environmental consequences, but there's environmental consequences of not progressing. We are going to see a shift of 4.5 million flights, 9 million car journeys each year onto high speed. That will have a carbon benefit, particularly when the wires in place.
No, it's not as simple to say that the tunnels will mitigate the loss of ancient woodland. Cutting and covering will actually destroy the habitat. So it's not a valid mitigation. And planting trees, you know, we accept it's great that there will be a lot of trees planted in the corridor, and that's very important. But destroying ancient woodland, the habitat, needs replacement with significant areas of forest.
Let me bring in Alistair, because you're against the overall economic case, aren't you? You think it's better use of the money.
That's absolutely right. I just don't think this case makes any sense. I think the costs are massively underappreciated. They'll be much bigger than 32 billion. These public sector projects, you know, always end up spending much more money than the politicians originally think, and I think the benefits are going to be much smaller. I think the numbers just don't make any sense. You know, if you want to spend all this money, spend it on something else. Spend it on, you know, airports and more motorways and other kinds of rail. The rail
the
infrastructure
Minister is making the point that other things are being done as well.
Yes, but
it's
not,
not just
yes, but
this.
clearly not enough. I mean, what they're doing here, they're spending £32 billion. It's a huge sum of money. It's a huge misallocation of resources. Lots of other projects could bring greater economic benefits to the UK. You could even renovate much more of the existing rail infrastructure. You'd get more benefits for Britain, you know, better journeys for travellers, you know, commuter railways on where the real problem lies and so on. I just don't buy that we should be spending £32 billion, £1,000 for every income taxpayer on this project. It's a white elephant. It makes no sense.
Well, there's plenty of business people who would disagree with you and are very enthusiastic about the project. And those in Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds are hugely enthusiastic because they think it's going to bring significant economic benefits to those areas. So that's not a view which is shared.
There will be some economic benefits, but the costs would be much higher. You could help these businesses, you could help these parts of the UK in other cheaper, more efficient, more effective ways.
We are helping them, and there's a whole. We're spending huge amounts of money on transport since the general election, despite the difficult economic circumstances, because we recognise that investment in transport is very good for the economy. So we're powering ahead with road and rail in a way that's not been done before. And the 33 million, can I just say, I just want to repeat the point, there's a 60% cushion in there.
33 billion.
Yes,
billion. Remember it's billion, not million.
Because, the costs coming down already. Because we recognise that projects from the public sector have tended to overshoot, so we've allowed for that by having an overestimate in the cost.
Did you see anything in that argument that was being made in the film that perhaps some of this is simply about politics, it's about helping out the North economically, but it's also showing that the government cares about the North because that's where the votes are?
I think all governments fall for the idea that some big prestigious project is like a silver bullet. We all care about actually ensuring the regeneration of this country. We want to see jobs and economic growth. The idea that one single scheme is going to do that is a delusion that all governments fall for. I'm old enough to remember Concorde, I can remember the Channel Tunnel, I can remember all these big schemes, the Dome. They are delusions. What actually brings real economic growth in this country is investment in our infrastructure, in our road...
infrastructure
but let me just finish. Sorry, the important point is in the road and rail infrastructure around the entire country that people actually use today.
But we're doing
They're
that.
the unsexy, unglamorous schemes that really bring jobs and growth.
We're doing that.
Don't believe the big silver bullet.
There was a whole number of announcements from the Chancellor in his last statement late last year of a whole lot of road schemes and rail schemes. There was further announcements from the Transport Secretary about local authority major schemes. We're doing it month on month. We're doing road and rail schemes like that.
But the point is you're spending exactly, it's the opportunity cost. You're spending £32 billion in this massive, untested project, which is unlikely to bring in the kinds of benefits that smaller projects could bring. And these smaller projects, you could tap the private sector. That way, you free up the burden on taxpayers. There'll be, less money spent and so on. And also, let's not forget, the higher taxes and the higher national debt that will be needed to pay for this project will hit the economy.
Well, first of all, we are doing both. We're doing the small projects and we're doing the large projects. We're not putting all our eggs in one basket. And as I've explained, the money from Crossrail, which we're spending, will simply be transferred to HS2 as a budget line. So we're not actually diverting money
But you could transfer
it
to something else, that's the point, right? You could transfer this money to something else. There's other ways of creating regeneration,
Do any of you think that there's any way of now stopping this project?
Absolutely.
You do?
I mean, the
legal
key thing
challenges
is,
or what?
Well, Gavin, you picked up the point earlier. I'm told that the publication today shows that the actual cost-benefit ratio of this has now gone down again, and it's progressively gone down every time the numbers are reworked. And half of that benefit actually accrues on the completely vacuous assumption that no businessman ever works on a train. Clearly we can win the economic argument because the business case doesn't stack up.
And on the political argument, I mean, there's some pretty important Conservative MPs in your area, very prominent members of this government, Cheryl Gillan, Dominic Grieve, David Liddington. They can't be very happy about it, presumably, although they're loyal members of the government.
Well, I can't talk for them, but I can tell you that right along the route, those of us who've actually studied the business case, looked at the environmental case, which quite frankly is vacuous as well, know this is a really poor value for money, and we can win that argument,
Do you think
I'm sure.
you might lose some government colleagues? These are very prominent members of the government. We know Cheryl Gillan in particular has been very vocal on this.
I don't think so, because if you're in the Commons today, you'll have seen a broad level of support from all three parties, and four of you, including nationalists as well, for what we're doing today. Of course, there were comments and criticisms, and there were suggestions for improvements, but by and large, it was a very mature debate, and people understand the reasons for it. And even though there are particular inconveniences for individual MPs, the concept, I think, has been bought by Parliament as a whole.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.